My name's Missy D. As some of you may know, I've worked my butt off to pay my way through college. I did have a small amount of cash put back, but it wasn't near enough to get me through a whole 4 years. So, the moment I arrived in the dorms, I hit the bricks on a search for employment. It wasn't long before I scored a job at a small Italian-style fast food dive just off of campus. The place was owned by 2 guys who we'll call Joe and Tony. They had come to the States as teenagers and worked various jobs until they had enough money saved to throw together and open the restaurant. Even though they had the knowledge of Italian food and the look of 2 men from the boot, I believe they were actually Albanian by birth. Despite being very close friends, the 2 men were quite different from each other, and because of this, they would often butt heads, but the disagreements never grew violent. Tony was the fun one of the 2. Working with him was always enjoyable, and I did my best to make sure I was scheduled to work the same shifts with him, but school sometimes prevented this, and I was stuck working with Joe. He was almost the exact opposite of Tony. A shift didn't go by without him cursing out one of the employees, myself included. Half of the time, you didn't even know what he was calling you because it was in a different language, but his body language said it all. I can't count the number of times I wanted to quit, but I knew I couldn't let my ego screw up my life, so I swallowed my anger and kept my head down. I didn't know it at the time, but things were already collapsing behind the scenes, and I wouldn't have that job for much longer anyways. About a week before Christmas break, I went in one evening and saw that both Joe and Tony were in the restaurant. This was unheard of in the 6 months that I'd been working there, and I quickly noticed a heavy feeling in the air I didn't like. I clocked in as usual and went straight to work. The strangest thing was that Tony nor Joe was talking to anyone other than short questions and phrases. Although it was pleasant not to be yelled at by Joe, Tony's cold demeanor only served to make me even more uncomfortable. All of us did our best to do our job, and things were going well until around 9 that night. I'm not sure how it started, but Joe and Tony were standing at one of the sandwich stations speaking in Albanian. From their body language, I could see that it was one of their usual heated arguments, but instead of choosing to walk away as one of them often did, the argument grew more loud and aggressive. Even though we were doing our best to ignore the disagreement, we still had orders to fill, and we needed to be in the same area from time to time as them. They had been arguing back and forth for about 10 minutes when I had to go to the walk-in to get some olives. Upon my return from the cooler, my focus was diverted by a loud phrase yelled out by Tony. I could tell from his tone it was something bad, and it must have been considering Joe's reaction to it. The whole time that they had been talking, Joe had been slicing sandwich toppings and waving his knife around with each word like a conductor's baton. However, when Tony said whatever he had, Joe's face went blank. For a second, he stood and stared with a look of disgust on his face. But then, in the blink of an eye, he plunged the chef's knife into Tony's chest. Naturally, I froze and didn't know what to do. A look of shock grew across Tony's face once he realized what had happened. He continued to stare at Joe for a few seconds before he said, "What have you done, man? No." Then he slumped to the ground like a bag of potatoes. Joe looked down at Tony as he bled out and continued to stare for a short moment. I didn't know if he knew I was standing behind them, so I did my best not to move. Another of the girls must have been coming from the front and witnessed the same thing. We stood still, looking at one another, trying not to draw Joe's attention. Her eyes were as big as saucers, and I imagined mine looked the same. I had no idea if he would come after the rest of us, and the sick feeling in my gut got worse and worse. Although I'm not sure how long this all lasted, it couldn't have been more than a minute. Looking up from Tony's bleeding body, Joe slowly turned towards us, and I saw the hurt look on his face. It seemed as if though he was about to speak, but he stopped himself. Then he briskly walked between the 2 of us and out the back door. The second the door slammed shut, we both ran to Tony. His eyes were starting to roll back in his head, and the pool of blood was growing larger and larger by the second. It wasn't until then I remembered I had my phone in my pocket. I pulled it out and dialed 911. While I spoke to the dispatcher, the other employee gathered up a few towels and packed them around the knife to slow the bleeding. I quickly yelled to the girl running the register to lock the doors because there had been an accident and someone was badly hurt. After she did this, she ran to the back and began screeching when she saw Tony on the floor. The girl helping him on the floor told her to shut up, and she did, and she kept staring at him. The paramedics showed up in less than 5 minutes, and when they loaded Tony up, they said he was stable. We filled the police in on the history of Joe and Tony's relationship and the business. The two of us that had witnessed the stabbing gave a description of Joe, and they picked him up before we had even left the restaurant. They said they found him walking on the other side of the road not a mile away. When they asked who he was, he confessed to the attack and began crying. Once that was taken care of, the waiting began. Day after day, we prayed for Tony's recovery, and after 2 days, he started to improve, but by the end of the week, he passed. It was said that when Joe heard the news, his wailing could be heard throughout the entire jail. Considering his obvious regret, the DA decided to charge Joe with second-degree murder. Joe took a plea deal and will be in prison for at least the next 15 years. Since this happened in 2005, he'll likely be getting out in the next few years. I briefly considered showing up for his parole hearing and arguing against it, but despite his nasty disposition, I know he regrets killing his best friend and will have to live with that till the end of his days. So, I'll just leave it to fate to decide his future, just as it does for us all. I've been urged by those close to me to share my account of a recent life-changing event I experienced while working the drive-thru window at my fast food job. Until this happened, I had yet to fall victim to the irrational anger some carry around all day inside of them. I was unaware of how easily they can be triggered, and now that I have seen it firsthand, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to fully trust another human again. Although, at this time it is still very difficult for me to relive the event, I am encouraged that, to do so through this post, I may be able to begin to take charge of my life again. I guess I'll start at the beginning in order to make what came next make more sense. My name is Zoe Marie, but my friends call me Zoe. I'm currently 17 and will soon graduate high school a year early because I was allowed to skip ahead a grade when I was younger. In order to instill a strong work ethic into their young daughter, my parents encouraged me to get a job once I had turned 16. Not being one that wanted to disappoint my parents, I soon found a part-time job at a chain burger and fries restaurant near my home. I would often ride my bike the 2 miles after school and work a few hours during the weekdays and longer shifts on weekend evenings. So I had always had all of my things paid for up until that time. Seeing each check filled me with a mixture of awe and achievement. These feelings appear to have done exactly what my parents had hoped and fired my will to work even harder. I'm not sure if this desire spawned from a place of greed. I'm sure the argument could be made. Nonetheless, I did look forward to each shift. My shift that night had started at the counter, but once the girl working the window ended her shift, I was moved to her station. At the time, I had no preference between counter and window. You came into contact with the rude and crude working both, and this night was no different. I had already had a big fat woman with her 3 snotty-nosed children in tow scream at me for making a small mistake in her order. Perhaps the only benefit I did have was that I rarely worked after midnight, so I didn't have to deal with many intoxicated customers that came later. The 1 or 2 times I did work later, I found it a trying experience. I'll keep my moral views to myself. I will only say that I see those who partake of alcohol as weak, and I'll leave it at that. My shift was ending in around an hour when I met my last customer. From the way the gentleman was speaking, I could tell he had been drinking that evening. The transaction was a string of confusion and chaos. He changed the order multiple times, and those in the car with him sounded as confused as him. The entire mess came to a head when I informed him that our shake machine was out of order. It was certainly broken. When I told him this, I was assaulted with a tirade of curses and derogatory names, and then he went silent. At first, I believed that there was something amiss with the headset, but I was wrong. the quiet was shattered by the squealing of tires. The cry of the tires was almost instantly joined by the roar of gunfire. I still believe to this day the only thing that saved my life was the sound of the tires. When I heard them, I leaned a bit forward in the window, almost putting my head out of the doors. I only expected an angry confrontation at that second, but coming face to face with the barrel of his gun as he extended his arm from his window, I instinctively ran for cover. The countless bangs from the gun and the screams of my fellow employees seemed to last a lifetime. No matter how I tried to drown them out by covering my head with my arms, they remained just as horrifying. I'm not sure when the firing finally stopped, but I didn't even consider raising my head until another of the employees shook me. I guess at the time he was checking to see if I had been struck by any of the bullets, but regardless of his intent, I hesitated a moment before I sat upright. To my dismay, 2 of the others working that night had been injured, and although neither of them died, I couldn't return to that restaurant or any of its kind for quite some time. Just now, over 6 months after this happened, can I finally see a business with a drive-through window without having a panic attack? In the months since the attack, I have spent a large amount of time and energy in counseling in the hopes of regaining my courage and ability to be a useful member of society again. Whether it's due to feelings of guilt or fear, the road has been a hard one, and if it were not for the sense of purpose and the hard work ethic my parents have helped foster in me, I may not have even made it through school. Despite my heartfelt hopes and many prayers, the police have yet to find or arrest the thugs that attempted to take my life because of a freaking shake machine. The best I can do is continue to have faith in law enforcement and the universal force of right. I know someday, some way, they will be made to pay for what they have done. The only real solace I can find is the fact that no one has lost their lives because of something I did or said.